Thanks, Todd. So I'm going to be talking about versions and upgrades for Condor and OSG. First thing I'm going to be talking about is the version numbers we use in Path. There's been a lot of confusion about that. Also, some confusion about the support life cycle since Condor and OSG have kind of joined together in Path. We've unified a lot of things, and so that's brought on some changes. We're going to also talk about our repositories, tarballs, and retention policies. There's a lot of questions about the recent retirement of CentOS 7. And then I'm going to get into upgrades, best practices there. So I'm responsible for overseeing the testing, make sure that bugs don't get out to you guys. We have 2 pools that we tested in CHTC. And I kind of keep an eye on every commit that goes into the source code. So I have a finger on the pulse of what's changing and where problems might arise. And then I write the release announcements, and we have, just a second. So on our release announcements, okay. Oh, you buried it, no worries. So I try to give a short, pithy explanation of what's in every release. And so I try to shoot for 3, 6 bullet points of reasons that you might want to upgrade to that release. So, you know, what's changed in it? So we have the long-term support channel where we have bug fixes, and occasionally we'll have a new platform appear. So that's what those release announcements look like. When we go to the feature channel, we kind of outline the new features. We recently added support for ARM CPU and like our Docker containers, stuff like that. So this is to give you an idea of what's in there. And if you guys have any feedback on how I'm doing on that, I'd be glad to hear it. So as I said before, we used to have different versioning for OSG and Condor. We also had different support life cycles. Last year, when we were talking at the conference, we had Condor 10.6 and 10.06, and there's HE Condor 6.0, and there's OSG 3.6, and which things are supposed to work together. And we decided to go to using a year. And we have Condor 23 with HT Condor CE 23 and OSG 23. We have both LTS versions. So HT Condor 23.0 is LTS. Same thing with Condor CE. And it's a little different in OSG. We have an OSG 23, which is based on the LTS, and 23 upcoming, which has the feature version. So what's in a number? So we switched to the first number on semantic versioning, which is the major version, and that represents the year of the initial release. So even though it's 2024, we initially released 2020 HE Condor 23. We shoot for August. Usually it's August, sometimes it's September. Last year it was September, but sometime in the 3rd quarter, out comes that new LTS version. The second number, the minor version number, if it's a 0, that means that it's the LTS release. We keep those stable. We don't change versions, don't change features and stuff. We may add a new feature if it's kind of separable or has high impact, low risk, but we keep that pretty stable. The third number is the patch level. Anything that ends with 0 is a testing release. Greater than 0 depends on how we iterate, and I'll talk about that later. It could be testing or a final release or a patch release after final. So we had kind of a divergence in that third number for LTS and second number in the feature version, and we're going to keep that the same in Condor 24 because it was confusing to people. They would like to know, we would like to know that 24.0.2, all those bug fixes are in 24.2. So talking about guaranteed version compatibility, 23.0, like I said, is kept very stable. So any 23.0 is going to be compatible with any other 23.0. It's an LTS release, bug fix only. 23X is also compatible with any 23.0, and we actually test for this capability. In our main pool, we're running mainly feature versions of Condor, but we have a few APs and EPs that are running the LTS version. We have our own build and test pool that we use to develop this software. There we're using the LTS CM, and we have a mix of feature. Well, we use a feature AP for that and a mix of EP nodes. So that's how we kind of guarantee the compatibility. And since 24.01 is going to be the culmination of what's in 23X, and 23X is compatible with 23.0, that means 24.0 and 23.0 will interoperate as well. So that's what we guarantee. In practice, we're pretty good about backward compatibility. In the OS pool, I just took a look this morning. We have some 10.9.0 EPs, and we've got some 9.0X APs. So the life cycle's changed a little bit in terms of support. Currently, we have 23X. It's under active development and is fully supported. 23.0 is getting regular bug fixes and is also fully supported. 10.0, which was last year's before, nominally 22, right, is getting security and critical bug fixes only. When 24.0 comes out in a couple months, 24X will be actively developed and fully supported. 24.0 will get regular bug fixes, and 23 moves to the just security and bug fixes only, critical bug fixes. So that means that every LTS has about 2 years of support. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our HTCSS repositories. That's where HT Condor CE and HT Condor lives. We have a daily repository. We have some collaborators that occasionally run things out of daily, especially if they want to get an early peek at new features. Things in this repository have passed all of our unit tests. No integration testing has been done, and this is kind of use at your own risk. Don't use it in production. But we sometimes get feedback from collaborators using this one. The RC repository is kind of CHTC's own repository where we run our production pool. But sometimes we will deploy and a new version will cause problems. So we're kind of doing integration testing here. We can easily roll back if we need to. We have an update repository, and this is the build that's being tested on the OS pool. If anybody wants to test and give feedback, feel free to test those builds. And then there's the final release repository. The repository definitions if you look at the Condor release package, or the file that's downloaded when you install a Debian or Ubuntu, you will see all of these repositories mentioned. They're just disabled or commented out, but they're easy to enable. Now, from HTCSS, we migrate to the OSG repos. And so the daily repo migrates into OSG development. The CHC repo doesn't go anywhere. And then the update, which is our testing repo, goes into OSG testing, and release migrates into release. And so that's 23.0, 23X. They all migrate to their respective development testing or release. So the OSG and the Condor versions and releases are very tightly tied together there. So retention policies on these repositories and tarballs. Many years ago, I deleted our RHEL 5 repositories. I figured, it's not being supported anymore by RHEL. What could go wrong? And we had one of our science collaborators saying, we need that, we're using it. So each Condor release, for as long as practical, we keep the very last release in an LTS series online. So currently we have versions back to 8.8. We don't support them, but use them at your own peril. As you saw, Oliver is still back on 9.0. So we are supporting the community. We don't want to pull the rug out from under you. And recently, CentOS 7 went end of life, and the repositories disappeared. And but we won't do that as long as they're practical. And that's true from the manual. We have previous versions. We actually hide the links to the previous versions of the manual. But I have a question for the audience. So do you think it would be valuable to have those links? Would you want to be looking at the 9.0 manual? So show of hands, who thinks would be valuable to have those links to prior versions of the manual? A couple people, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Necessarily. Could you provide diffs rather than just necessarily the previous version?
Provide diffs.
I.e., basically, this was removed, that sort of thing, at least as part of the next.
Yeah,
sort
well,
of a change
okay, I'll get into that later. There's actually a section of the manual that will give the diffs from one LTS to the next. Go or Matt's.
I think, we already have the documentation. I think it's useful to keep it around. Other software stacks like Ceph, they have a drop down. You can say, no, I want the old version. Of course, a big angry banner says you should upgrade appears, but at least I can go back and see how to upgrade from back in time.
Okay.
Well, I think the downside is that it's really hard to Google sometimes because you get some really outdated stuff.
Yeah, we have that problem with the old manual, and I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it happening since we moved to read the docs.
Right.
Usually in Google, when I'm Googling something for Condor and I get the manual, it's usually pointing at latest.
Right.
So I think maybe that problem's avoided. I mean, that was kind of the motivation for me to hide it away, because we had that problem. People would Google and they would get some ancient old thing that didn't apply anymore. But I think that's changed with Read the Docs. Okay. Thank you for your feedback. Retention, I was talking about the release repositories. The daily repositories, we don't have an infinite amount of storage space. So when a new daily version appears, when the version number goes from 23.9 to 23.10, for example, we will remove the previous dailies. The RC repositories, we actually remove after 2 newer versions. They're used for testing, because what's happening is that in CHTC, we're still running the RCs. We actually never run a final release on CHTC, because as soon as we release, we have a code freeze, and we start immediately deploying the next RC. And so we have a mixed pool of 2 different RCs. So same for the update repositories. We had a different schema in mind when we named these repositories, and I'm planning to rename the repositories. The daily repository is a misnomer. Things don't appear there daily, especially for LTS. We can go a week or 2 before we get something in LTS. So things never appear on weekends, or almost never. I'm going to call the daily a snapshot. It's just a snapshot of the latest thing that we have built. The RC repository will be renamed CHTC, and that's because we're using that for internal testing. And I don't want people to say, oh, here's RC, I'll give it a try, and then they have an issue. And the update repository will be renamed, and I'll fix that on the side. It's going to be renamed RC. So that will be apparent that's the release candidate. People can pick it up and give it a try. I'll fix that in the slide before it gets uploaded to our website. So what about CentOS 7? CentOS 7 went end of life, and the repositories were just torn down. If you want to try to run Yum on CentOS 7 or Scientific Linux 7, you can't do that. However, I just looked at the OS pool today. The primary EP hardware platform is CentOS 7. Now, the software platform is CentOS 9. So that means that they're running Aptane or Singularity or something to do that. But we still have a lot of people that haven't migrated. So we are supporting the community here. Luckily, 2 years ago, we moved to building in Docker containers. And I made our Docker container build containers entirely self-contained. So you did not need to access the network repositories at all in order to build for CentOS 7. So we will continue building and providing RPMs and tarballs for CentOS 7 through the rest of 23. So it's basically adding a few months. You know, it went end of life June 30th. The only problem with that, and I think it's not a big problem, we can't add external packages like Aptainer or Pelican, because those come from repositories when I build the image for building Condor. But I think that this is going to be good enough to tide people over until they get off of CentOS 7. But once we code freeze for 24.0, there's no CentOS 7 anymore. So upgrades, features versus LTS versions. We encourage people to update to the latest feature version. We run this in production at CHTC. So in the past, we kind of had big warning signs, don't run we call it the development version unless you knew what you're doing. But this is also what the feature version is also what OS Pool is running. So it's in production. Some collaborations have switched over from using the LTS version to using the feature version because they want to take advantage of the newest feature, give us feedback, and we saw that in the poll that a lot of people are using the feature version. Now, there are some people that don't want to update every month, and we have LTS versions that receive only bug fixes. And there's help with, you know, you can annually update. We actually make an update script that can assist in that. So when we upgrade from one LTS to the next LTS, read the section on upgrading. So if I go over to here. So we have this page in the manual when you're going from one LTS to the next. Right at the top, it's upgrading from 10 to 23, and it lists the major features. What are the advantages to going to this new version? And then at the bottom, we have what is it that you might end up having to change. So these, we call them the gotchas, right? So we had changes in DAGman and how environment variables are passed that could trip users up. And this document is actually somewhat dynamic. I mean, we do a fairly good job putting out, you know, problems that you might encounter going from one LTS to the next LTS. And then occasionally somebody will upgrade to an LTS and they'll have an issue and they'll mail us at HTCondur admin or HTCondur users and like, I have this issue, how do I solve it? We will add that to the gotchas and we will actually update the upgrade check script. So this is the diff that you're looking for. What is the diff from year to year? And so you know, some people don't even read this thing. So that's why we wrote the script. The script actually will automate looking at as much of this as it can and give you advice on what you need to to upgrade. If you upgrade an AP, a CM, central manager, maybe you have new hardware. This is going to a new machine. There's an accountant file that you should bring along with you. And that kind of keeps fair share and stuff like that. If you move an AP to a new machine, you'd like to bring the job queue log to the new AP. That way users don't have to resubmit their job. So a Condor pool will survive with the CM being down for a while because, you know, once the matches are giving out, the SCED can reuse them. The same thing with an AP can be down for a little while. It will reconnect to jobs and resubmit automatically. Occasionally, you'll have to do something with configuration during a transition. We have a special verb in the configuration language. You can check the version. It only is a simple expression, so you can do version greater than equal to, or less than or equal to, but you can nest or use else if to change your configuration. That way you can have it ready in advance of your upgrade. Last thing I want to talk about is the preferred upgrade order. Is there one? Not really. Common sense is, you know, you start with a central manager and update your APs and up to your EPs. I have a cautious approach, and this is what I use with, you know, this is the new RC software. I update a few test APs and EPs, and I run Hello World jobs on the same version, cross versions, both feature and LTS, make sure that works. I update the CM the next day and a quarter of the EPs. I actually set the shutdown graceful timeout to 18 hours to let jobs drain. And we tend to update our pool like 25% at a time. After that, I update the essentials APs. I do a manual shutdown on those because there's actually I think a defect in the code. It doesn't shut down fast when it's expected to. Hopefully we'll fix that soon. And then for my LTS testing, I do the carefree upgrade. I just upgrade everything all at once and I'm done. So if there are any questions, let me know. Feedback at either tim@css.edu if you want a public discussion on Condor users.